Jamahal Hill had always known the brutal nature of the fight game, but nothing had quite prepared him for the sequence of events that unfolded at UFC 311. It wasn't just the loss itself, but the way it all happened. After a fierce back-and-forth battle with Jiri Prochazka, Hill found himself on the wrong end of a brutal third-round knockout. The weight of the defeat settled heavily on his shoulders, his second consecutive knockout loss, a shocking turn of events for the once promising UFC light heavyweight champion. The path to light heavyweight supremacy that Hill had envisioned just months ago seemed now like an impossible dream. He had entered the cage at UFC 311 with the weight of expectations on his back, eager to turn the page on the loss to Alex Pereira at UFC 300. But despite the rigorous training, despite the preparation, and despite the heart Hill showed in the cage, it wasn't enough. Prochazka's raw power, relentless aggression, and calculated ground and pound proved to be too much. Hill's defeat seemed to signify a crossroads in his career, one that threatened to push him further away from his ultimate goal, regaining his place at the top of the light heavyweight division. Yet, in the midst of the sting of defeat, Hill refused to let the loss consume him. He had tasted victory, and he had tasted defeat, both equally humbling, both equally valuable. Hill wasn't going to let his setback define him. He knew the UFC wasn't a place where fighters could afford to hang their heads. The only way forward was through resilience, through pushing past the adversity, and that was exactly what Hill planned to do. As if the chaotic emotions from the fight weren't enough, a strange twist awaited Hill outside the Intuit Dome following UFC 311. In a moment that could only be described as surreal, Hill came face to face with a viral Jiri Prochazka lookalike. This wasn't just any fan, it was a man who had recreated Prochazka's signature fight night look, complete with the wild hair and fierce stare that made the former champion a global sensation. It was a moment that could have easily been awkward, a confrontation between two figures tied to the same fight but on vastly different sides of the outcome. But what followed was far from expected. Rather than the tension or hostility one might have anticipated from such a clash of personalities, Hill found humor in the encounter. It was almost as if the weight of the fight, the emotional exhaustion of the night, had been lifted for a moment by this absurd interaction. Hill, in his usual laid-back yet dignified way, approached the fan with a smirk, pretending to be ready for a physical altercation. The crowd around them could feel the tension at first, but then came the inevitable burst of laughter as Hill embraced the ridiculousness of the situation. It was a true testament to his character. Even in the face of a tough loss, Hill refused to take himself too seriously. He gave the fan a nod of respect, his way of acknowledging the surreal nature of the moment. This small interaction may have seemed insignificant to some, but for those who witnessed it, it was a shining example of what kind of fighter Hill was, not just in the octagon, but as a person. He could have easily been bitter, angry, or resentful after a defeat that sent him further down the title ladder. But instead, Hill showed grace, humor, and respect, qualities that made him stand out as a fighter, and even more so as a man. As if that wasn't enough, the viral fan wasn't the only one to catch the attention of UFC 311 viewers. Another fan, a cancer patient, had gone viral after donning Prochazka's signature war hair. This fan's journey had garnered the admiration of Prochazka himself, who had flown her out to UFC 311, where she sat octagon side to witness her hero's victory in person. The connection between Prochazka and his fans had always been special, but this moment elevated that bond to something truly profound. The fighter, who had recently returned from a difficult loss, showed not just physical strength, but a heart full of generosity. Prochazka's victory at UFC 311 was more than just a win in the cage. It was a reaffirmation of the fighter's resilience after facing setbacks of his own. His comeback, following a short-notice loss to Pereira, showed the strength of his character. Now, with Prochazka reclaiming his spot in the title mix, he would potentially face the winner of the upcoming fight between Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. But Prochazka's journey was far from over. His win over Hill had revitalized his career, and the former champion was eyeing a return to the title fight. For Hill, however, the future was less certain. His career had been defined by both extraordinary highs and crushing lows. After winning the vacant title at UFC 283, Hill had seemed to be on top of the world. But the losses to Pereira and Prochazka had left him in a difficult spot. The dream of being a UFC champion again was still alive, but it had become more distant with each passing defeat. Yet, Hill's resilience was never in question. While some fighters might crumble under the pressure, Hill was already thinking about what came next. He knew that UFC 311 wasn't the end of his story. It was merely another chapter, a difficult one, but one that he would learn from. As Hill shared his post-fight thoughts with his fans, it was clear that he had no intention of letting the losses define him. He wasn't just fighting for a title, he was fighting for his legacy. In the coming months, Hill would have to bounce back from consecutive knockout defeats, something he had never experienced before in his career. The losses stung, but they were also opportunities to grow, to refine his skills, and to come back better. It wasn't about how many times he had fallen, it was about how many times he could rise again. One name that would undoubtedly loom large on Hill's horizon was Khalil Rountree Jr., the fighter Hill had once been scheduled to face before UFC 303. With Rountree's impressive performances and Hill's need for a comeback fight, the matchup seemed destined to happen. It was a fight that could determine whether Hill was truly ready to reclaim his place at the top of the division or whether his time in the title picture had passed. In the end, it was clear that Hill's journey was far from over. The losses, though painful, were just bumps in the road. The fight game was never about perfection, it was about resilience, and Hill had plenty of that. The UFC light heavyweight division had seen many fighters rise and fall, but Jamahal Hill was determined to prove that he could climb back to the top. His story was not yet finished. It was only just beginning. As Jamahal Hill continued to process the aftermath of his UFC 311 defeat, his focus began to sharpen on the road ahead. The sting of back-to-back losses, though fresh and painful, didn't break him. Instead, it set the stage for a determined comeback, one that would define the next phase of his career. In the unforgiving world of the UFC, where fighters are constantly judged by their most recent performance, Hill knew the next chapter had to be a victory. It would be his chance to prove to everyone, his critics, his fans, and himself, that he wasn't finished. The real test, after all, wasn't just about the losses, but about how he would respond. But as Hill plotted his return to the octagon, another storyline continued to develop within the light heavyweight division, one that was capturing just as much attention. Jiri Prochazka, the enigmatic former champion, had reasserted his place in the title conversation with a thrilling victory over Hill at UFC 311. The fight was a spectacle, a brutal exchange of blows that showcased the heart and toughness of both fighters. But in the end, it was Prochazka's relentless aggression and superior ground game that earned him the finish in the third round, securing a hard-fought victory and propelling him back into the mix of title contenders. Prochazka's comeback story was nothing short of extraordinary. His rise to the top had been meteoric, with his unorthodox style and devastating knockout power making him a fan favorite. But his journey was also fraught with obstacles. After winning the light heavyweight title in a dramatic fight against Glover Teixeira at UFC 275, Prochazka's reign was cut short by an injury that sidelined him for over a year. His return to action was highly anticipated, and the UFC 311 showdown with Hill had given him the opportunity to prove that he was ready to reclaim the title. Despite the excitement surrounding Prochazka's victory, there was another layer to his story that added depth to the narrative. After the fight, the UFC star had a moment of kindness that would leave a lasting impact on the fans. Prochazka had been deeply moved by the outpouring of support he received from one particular fan, a young cancer patient who had donned Prochazka's signature war hair to show her support. This fan's story had gone viral on social media, and it caught the attention of Prochazka, who went above and beyond to make her experience special. Not only did Prochazka fly her out to UFC 311 to watch the fight live, but he also invited her to meet him at the arena. The moment when they met, with the young fan beaming in excitement, was a beautiful contrast to the brutal combat in the cage. It was a reminder that, despite the violence and the bloodshed of the sport, there were moments of humanity that transcended the competition. Prochazka's gesture was a powerful statement of gratitude, and it showed the fighter's true character, one that extended beyond the octagon and into the hearts of his fans. This story, though heartwarming, was just one part of the bigger picture. With his win at UFC 311, Prochazka had firmly positioned himself as a serious contender once again. As rumors swirled about who he would face next, one name loomed large in the background: Alex Pereira. The current champion had already defeated Hill in his last bout, and now Prochazka was making a case for a title shot. UFC 313 would be pivotal in shaping the future of the light heavyweight division, as Pereira was set to face off against Magomed Ankalaev in a highly anticipated title defense. Depending on the outcome, Prochazka might find himself standing across the cage from the winner, ready to battle for the belt once more. For Prochazka, the journey ahead was full of promise and uncertainty. While his victory at UFC 311 had earned him the respect of fans and fighters alike, he knew that the true test lay ahead. To reclaim the light heavyweight title, Prochazka would need to continue proving that his unique fighting style was more than just a flash in the pan. He had already shown that he could come back from adversity. His victory over Alexander Raki at UFC 300 was a testament to that. But the next challenge, whether it was Pereira or Ankalaev, would be the ultimate test of his resolve and skill. For Hill, the challenge was different. He had been at the top of the division, only to be knocked down twice in succession. The climb back up would require more than just physical strength. It would demand mental toughness, focus, and a willingness to adapt. His first UFC 311 loss to Pereira had already taught him valuable lessons. Now, Hill would need to take the knowledge from that defeat and apply it in his training, adjusting his approach and learning from his mistakes. As a fighter, Hill had always been known for his striking power, his aggressive style, and his ability to finish opponents. But in the face of adversity, he would have to refine his game, adding layers to his skills and becoming even more dangerous inside the cage. The light heavyweight division was evolving rapidly, with new stars emerging and older champions reclaiming their place in the spotlight. Hill's place within this landscape was still uncertain, but he was determined to make his mark again. He was a fighter who had already faced setbacks, and his resilience would be his greatest asset moving forward. His story was one of perseverance, and as Hill shared in his post-fight statement, his fire had never burned brighter. Despite the losses, despite the tough moments, he was not giving up. He would return to the octagon, ready to fight for redemption. In the coming months, the light heavyweight division would undergo a series of shifts, with fighters like Hill, Prochazka, Pereira, and Ankalaev all jockeying for position. The title picture was as fluid as ever, and Hill knew that if he wanted to be a part of it again, he would have to earn his place. The journey would not be easy, but if history had taught him anything, it was that no loss was ever final. Every setback, every defeat, was just another chapter in the story of a fighter who refused to quit. As the UFC 311 night faded into memory, Hill and Prochazka, both in their own ways, were already looking to the future. And for fans of the sport, that future promised to be just as thrilling, if not more so, than the past. The light heavyweight division was on the verge of a new era, one where the battles, both in the cage and beyond it, would continue to captivate the world.